Chapter 12. Pigs that Preached the Gospel. Teacher Tuan had just come to the spring to take his morning wash. At his approach, a herd of pigs slithered out of the mud and scampered up the hill. What a filthy place this is! He glared after the pigs. Something must be done. Christian people should not have to put up with such dirty animals. Kondima had followed him down to the spring with her cake of yellow soap and her bundle of dirty clothes. Now she held her nose in disgust. "Do other countries have pigs?" she asked. "Yes, I suppose so." Dodd still scowled. "But I'm sure they are not allowed to run everywhere and to dirty everything that people have to live with. I have heard that none of the people who worship God keep pigs." Kondima spread her washing on the rock and waited for the water to settle. "That is not entirely true." Teacher Dodd sat down on a rock to wait too. "You see, many millions of people are Mohammedans. They worship God, and they hate pigs. They allow no pigs in their village. So people have gotten the idea that all worshippers of God hate pigs. Well, I hate them." Kondima began to scrub her clothes. "Do you suppose if all the Christian people helped, we could build a fence that would keep the pigs out of our gardens and away from our homes?" "That's a good idea, child." Teacher Dodd scratched his head. "Of course we couldn't fence the spring, but maybe we could keep them out of our side of the village." The good idea about the fence might have waited for a long time, but something happened on that very day that stirred the anger of the village people to fury. Gulan's house stood near the house of Kondima's father. These two houses mark the rough boundary between the heathen side of the village and the part where the Christian families lived. Since Golan kept more pigs than anyone else, they always swarmed about the hut of Kondima's father. "Take Banny down and let him play on the grass with his motor cars," Mother said to Chaya. "He makes so much noise the baby can't sleep." Chaya picked up her little brother and carried him to a small patch of grass under the durian tree. Just at that moment, Kondima came down the ladder with a small bag of something in her hand. "What is it, Kondima?" Chaya sprang up, and her brown eyes grew big with surprise as Kondima untied a handkerchief and emptied out some brown seeds. "What are they?" Mookit came up to see. Elijah looked out the window of her hut, then came scurrying down the ladder. "These are apple seeds," she exclaimed to the children. Then she ran back into her house and brought out a book with a colored picture of a large, round, rosy red fruit. "I ate one of them every day in the hospital, and I saved every seed. I am going to plant them, and maybe they will have apples." Kondima danced with excitement at the thought of eating apples from her own tree. "I will plant them when we can build a fence to keep the pigs away." A terrified scream came from under Mookit's house. Then the children saw that while they had been admiring the apple seeds, Banny had crawled away from the patch of green grass where Chaya had left him. Now they could see him in the mud beneath Mookit's house, surrounded by a dozen little pigs. The old sow rushed upon him with an angry grunt, knocked him over on his back, and fastened her teeth in one of his little fat legs. For an instant the children could do nothing. Fear and surprise struck them dumb and helpless. Wild howls and pitiful screams brought Mother and all the rest of the village people. Chaya plunged in, fought off the sow with shrieks and blows, and rescued Banny. She brought him out, and Mother carried him to the spring where she washed his bitten leg and his dirty little body. Teacher Dodd came and put strong medicine on the wound and bandaged Banny's leg with a strip of white cloth. Kondima, Mookit, and Elijah did not stop screaming. Some kind of terror laid hold on them. In all their lives they had never known a pig to bite anyone. To Kondima, all the village pigs suddenly became frightful monsters who might devour all the people and take over the place. She had known that pigs smelled bad, rooted up the gardens, and fouled the springs. But that a pig should bite their own little Banny filled her with such horror that she could not control her howls, and neither could Mookit or Elijah. Teacher Dodd finally took them to the spring, where he dashed cold water all over them. Then he led them to his house, where he quieted them with a song. That evening, when Father came home from the rice field, Mother told him the whole story. He took Banny in his arms and looked at his hurt leg. Even the baby's foot looked red and swollen from the pig's bite. Father's eyes flashed as he put Banny back in Mother's arms. Kondima could see him tremble and his hands clenched into hard fists. He went down the ladder and over to Teacher Dodd's house. Kondima followed him, fairly bursting with rage herself. Is nothing to be done about these pigs? Father's eyes flashed, and he glared at the teacher. The time has come for all the Christian men in this village to make a protest to the government. Teacher Dodd looked angry too. And the time has come for us to work together and build a stout fence around our homes. In the excitement and anger caused by Banny's misfortune, several strong men offered all their time and strength to build fences. They drove strong stakes and pounded them deep into the ground. They wove tight lengths of rattan together between the stakes to make a tight fence. Teacher Dodd worked with them and encouraged them to keep at their hard labor. In a few days, they finished, and all the Christian families looked on the fence with pride, but none more than Kondima. Teacher Dodd told them that he would carry their protest to the government office in the city by the sea himself. Weeks went by. Kondima had been home in her village almost 5 months. The pig-tight fence had worked well. The pigs found a few weak places in it, but strong hands always laid hold and built a stronger barrier than before. The two parts of the village began to look quite different. All the Christian people had planted gardens around their houses. Tuan had sent them flower seeds and gotten a lot of vegetable seeds from the Chinese gardeners down in the valley by the ocean. Kondima planted some of her apple seeds, and they had grown a few beautiful pale green leaves. The apple trees were the favorite plants for all the small folks. Kondima and Chaya watched over them constantly. Green grass sprang up around the Christian people's huts, but the pig-infested part of the village looked more disgusting than ever, because more pigs had to amuse themselves with less ground. Whenever the heathen women wanted to sit outside in the sun to weave baskets or mats, they always came over the fence and sat where the ground was clean and the grass grew soft and thick. The men had built a stile where people could come over the fence between Kokit's house and the house of Kondima's father. These two houses stood near the center of the village. One evening, Kondima saw Mookit running down the hill and heard him shout, "The Tuan is coming! The Tuan is coming!" She could see through the falling dusk a group of travelers coming out of the jungle trail at the top of the hill. At first, she could not make out who they were. Then, as they came closer, she shouted, "It is not our Tuan. We never saw that Tuan before." Teacher Dodd went out to welcome the strangers and invited them to his house. They dropped their bohongans and entered with words of grateful thanks to the teacher. It is a government Tuan, Father explained to his family a few minutes later. He has come to answer our complaint about the pigs. Father put on his best shirt and went over to the teacher's house, where all the Christian men had begun to gather. Come, Chaya, let us hide in Teacher Dodd's house, then we can see and hear everything they say and do. Kondima drew her sister with her, and the two girls squatted in the darkness just inside Teacher Dodd's kitchen door. They could hear well, but no one could see them. The new Tuan spoke. Of course you know that our government permits all the village people to keep whatever animals they require for their own use. Kondima peeked around the door as far as she dared. She could see the government Tuan, a kind-looking young man with yellow hair and blue eyes. We can't forbid anyone to keep pigs. The Tuan shifted his legs a little. Kondima knew how tired his legs must feel. It seems rather unreasonable of you, he looked towards Teacher Dodd, to ask a government official to come here to talk about pigs. Then Teacher Dodd spoke in a gentle voice. We do not wish to be unkind to our neighbors. He included all the men in the room with a wave of his hand. We wish only to live in peace and to keep our gardens and our houses clean. We want proper places for our children to play where pigs do not hurt them. Then Father spoke up and told how the old sow had bitten Banny. Mother brought the little fellow. The wound had healed, but an ugly red scar still flamed on his chubby little leg. Now the heathen men began to crowd in, and they argued for the pigs. At last, when their voices grew louder and louder, the government Tuan stood up. I am so tired, he said. Come back in the morning, and we will settle the matter. At sunrise, Kondima went to the spring. So did Teacher Dodd and his visitor, the government Tuan. Everyone had to stand and wait while the herd of wallowing pigs scampered off and the water settled. The Tuan's blue eyes flashed. I say, my friend, those pigs are filthy things. Teacher Dodd said nothing. Is this the Christian side of the village? The official climbed the stile to get back to the Teacher Dodd's house. We have built a fence to separate our homes from the others, the teacher answered. Kondima watched the new Tuan as he stood for a moment on top of the stile and looked first at one part of the village and then at the other. What are these plants? The Tuan asked. They look like young apple trees. Yes, yes, Kondima looked up into his face. These are my apple trees. She swept her hand over them proudly. And these are the flowers of Chaya and Mookit. She pointed to a bed of marigolds and zinnias in full bloom. Now exactly what do you want done about these pigs? The government official asked of Teacher Dodd as they climbed the ladder to his house. We want the pigs to be fenced in proper pens, or else we want to get rid of them, Teacher Dodd answered. Of course, the best thing would be to persuade the heathen people to get rid of them from their own wish. Can you not make them a speech of good words to turn their hearts against the pigs? The government Tuan laughed. I will do my best. Please call all the village fathers and give me a chance. Teacher Dodd took a hollow buffalo horn from the wall of his cottage and blew a long and powerful blast, the signal he used to call the people to worship or to counsel. In a few moments, people came out of the huts and began climbing the hill to the teacher's house. When they had all crowded in and seated themselves on clean mats, the government Tuan began his speech. My friends, I did not realize until this morning the beauty of your village. You remember I came in rather late last evening. This morning I have had a chance to look around and see what a lovely spot you have chosen for your village. The government is anxious to have some of these hill villages, such as yours, developed into places which strangers to our country may visit, and which will give them a good impression of the people and their habits of living. Of course, you realize that it is your right to keep your pigs as long as they are fenced in tight yards where they will not bother your neighbors. But since you already have such a good start towards making your village one of the finest in Borneo, the government would count it a great favor if you would sell your pigs and try to make the whole village like the garden down there by the stile. He pointed towards the garden of Kondima's father. I don't pay too much attention to religion, but I must say your pigs have preached the most powerful sermon I have heard in many a day. After the government Tuan had gone, the men discussed the pig problem for many hours. Teacher Dodd spent days visiting back and forth among all the village people, the heathen as well as the Christians. At last the heathen people set a day on which they planned to hold a great feast. They invited other heathen people from the hill villages all around them. Kondima never forgot that day. Early in the morning the men began to kill the pigs. The women kindled fires and set huge pots of meat to cook. 3 days of feasting followed. We may as well eat them all up and be done with them, Gulan told his guests. After the last pig had been eaten and the last visitor left, the men took down the fence that divided the village. Everyone shared the flowers. Everyone planted flowers and vegetables and fruit trees. Durand village began to look like a lovely garden. Now nothing stood between Gulan and the Jesus teaching. He and his wife came every day to Teacher Dodd's house to hear the good stories. One early morning, Kondima saw Gulan hurrying to the teacher's cottage. "Come to my house," he shouted in a joyful voice from the foot of the ladder. "I want you to pray to the God of heaven and ask his blessing on my family. My wife gave birth to a son last night." Kondima listened and felt her heart quiver with gladness. She ran to the mat where Chaya still slept. "Wake up," she shouted. "The pigs and the devils are being driven out of Durand village. Come." She grabbed the sleepy Chaya by her hand. "Come, let us go and see the new baby." This is the end of the story of Jungle Thorn.